Hi, this is Damon Fordham, and I'm the author of a number of books, including True Stories of Black South Carolina, as well as Voices of Black South Carolina, and a professor of history and English at Virginia College in Charleston, as well as Springfield College in Charleston. And I've written a new book that's called Mr. Potts and Me that has gotten a lot of attention in the South Carolina, as well as slowly but surely across the rest of the United States. Now, a lot of people are asking me, okay, who's Mr. Potts and what it's all about? Here's the story. Now, if you look at the cover of this book, you see a younger picture of myself around 1972 at the age of 8. And this is around the time the story takes place. And here's the background information into it. You see, there were two giants in my childhood. The first was my father, Abraham Fordham, who was born in 1922 and who was married my mother in 1960, and they adopted me in 1965 when I was 9 months old. And one of the great things about my dad was not only was he a school teacher, but he also told me a lot of very fascinating stories, some of which I'm about to share with you in a moment. And another great giant of my childhood was this older gentleman who you see gracing the cover, the back cover, the back part of this book. His name was Walter Snipe, and when he was a fairly young man, he basically took in my mother to raise when my mother's grandfather died. And so I grew up with him as sort of a grandfather figure. He was a fairly well-known community leader, and this is a picture of him in 1945 when he helped to invent a ship caulking device at the Charleston Naval Shipyard. And we referred to him as Papa. Well, he died when I was 9 years old. And so therefore one day I visited my father's grave on February the 14th, 1991, on the 7th anniversary of his death. And I started thinking about all the wonderful stories that Dad told that would be lost to history if I didn't do something. So I wrote down a series of my father's anecdotes, and I've said, hey, you know what? This is good, but how am I going to get other people to want to read this? So then an idea came to me. I decided to conceive of this story of this confused young boy who finds solace in understanding in the stories of this old man who befriends him and tells him all these stories, gets him through life. And I combined the characters of my father and Walter Snipe into a gentleman called Mr. Ernest Monroe Potts. And he's basically this local community person who kind of entertains as well as educates his neighbors by telling them all these wonderful stories. And that's what he does with this kid and gets him through life. So therefore, the final result of all of that was the book Mr. Potts and Me, which came out in July of 2012 after years of a project I had just put off over the years. Well, anyway, some of the wonderful things about the book are the stories that my father told that I managed to preserve in them. And one of the stories he used to love to tell me was that of Jackie Robinson and Joe Louis. He used to love to tell me about how whenever I felt that I had obstacles to deal with, he would tell me of how when he was a little boy back when black people had very few public role models, he remembered listening to the radio when Joe Louis, the Brown Bomber, the second black heavyweight champion, got into the ring with Max Schmeling, who basically at that time was fighting for Hitler's Germany. And so the people over in Germany were saying that, oh, Joe was this inferior human being, who would easily be defeated by Max Schmeling. And of course that made Joe and a lot of black Americans mad. So mad that when Joe got into the ring with Max Schmeling, within less than 3 minutes, Joe Louis bam, 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 knocked Max Schmeling down to his knees and ended one of the shortest fights in history. And how much good that did to the morale of the people who listened to that on the radio, because you have to understand there were very few black major public figures in those days, and you know the people were undergoing a lot of conditions that led them to be downtrodden, and so this was a great morale booster for the people at that time. And he would also tell me about how Jackie Robinson, when he was the first black person who played for the major leagues, how he would face all this abuse at the baseball diamonds. In fact, He used to tell me that one time there was this guy who took a black cat and threw it out on the field and said, "Look here, Jackie, there's your cousin." And with all of that abuse, he was not allowed to fight back, but he put all of his energy into knocking out those home runs and all that and making a great name for himself and clearing the way for African Americans to become involved in Major League sports. And he told me all of this as a child, not to induce hatred in me, but in order to help me to understand that what obstacles I faced in my time were minor compared to the major obstacles that these people faced in other times. Well, anyway, I captured all of that into Mr. Potts and Me. And as I mentioned before, the book came out in July of 2012 after years of me getting involved with other projects and rejection of it by other publishers and so forth. The Evening Post Press of Charleston is publishing it. And some interesting things that came out as a result of the book that I didn't think about when I wrote it. We're living in a time today where a lot of young men are growing up without not only fathers in the home, but also without people like Mr. Potts who are there to give them the correct and proper guidance through life and to entertain them as well as educate them to this folk tradition that was passed down through the generations. Because there was a time when every neighborhood had people like that, and that's what kind of kept traditions going and helped keep generations of families stable and all that, is the understanding of who they were so they could know how well they could be as people. So a number of people have mentioned that the book has done a lot of good in that aspect because it's helped people to understand that it's necessary to preserve the wisdom of the elders, or elders that wise may be with us no more. So anyway, hopefully you can find yourself a copy of Mr. Potts and Me on Amazon.com or the Evening Post website or even the Barnes & Noble website. If they don't have it in your store, you can order it on their website. And in fact, I'm already working on a sequel called American Storyteller, which will take the Mr. Potts character and his family back through from the slavery era up through where the little boy in the story, who's loosely based on me, into his adult years. So whenever you can, hopefully you'll pick up a copy of Mr. Potts and Me, and that it will educate as well as entertain. This is Damon Fordham talking about my new book, Mr. Potts and Me. Thank you.